I have always been a woman who trusts easily, perhaps because, in my youth, people seemed simpler, more straightforward, or perhaps because my mother taught me that we must look for the best in others until life proves us wrong. That was how she came into my house and my heart, without hurry, without noise. She arrived as someone who only came to help, but ended up taking a place I never imagined would turn to poison. Are you curious to find out how it all happened? Then subscribe to the channel now, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening to this story from. I love to know where you're following me from. And look, if I were you, I wouldn't miss what's coming up. The truth I'm about to reveal will move you in ways you can't even imagine. Are you ready? At that time, I no longer had enough health to handle everything by myself. My children had each gone their own way, too busy with their own families, and my husband spent many hours away, saying that work left him no rest. The house was large and silent, and I found myself needing hands to help me. When someone spoke of her, they said she was a woman of good character, that she had worked in other homes, and that she was respectful. I did not doubt it. I did not know how to doubt. The first time she came, I remember she arrived wearing a simple dress, her hair neatly pinned up in a bun, and an expression that looked humble. She said she would be content with little, that she came only for her livelihood, and that she was grateful for the opportunity. I felt pity for her. She was so young, so thin, and seemed to carry the weight of some old sadness. I thought it would be good to have company, someone to share the silence that filled the house. It never crossed my mind that such company would bring the greatest sorrow of my life. She began by helping me with the small things. First, she washed the laundry. Later, she took over the kitchen, and then she started caring for me when the pain in my legs would not let me walk well. I grew used to her presence. It was as if, all of a sudden, that woman had become part of my routine. I would tell her my memories, show her the old photographs, talk about the times when everything was celebration and abundance, and she would listen quietly, with that same look of someone who keeps secrets. As the months passed, my husband seemed to change. Before, he would come home tired but still sit and talk for a while. He would bring some news from town, ask if I was well. After she arrived, he became different, quieter, more distant. I told myself it was only my imagination, that he was worried about debts, about the fields. But inside me, a small voice began to whisper that there was something more behind that silence. I did not want to hear that voice, because when we love, we invent excuses for everything. And I loved that man. It was not the love of a young woman, the kind that makes you lose your senses. It was the love of an old woman who had seen many things, who knew no one is perfect, but still believed that some part of him was good. I did not want to think he could hurt me that way, and I did not want to think she could be part of any evil. I grew attached to her in a way that today seems almost naive to me. She was the one who helped me get up when weakness came, who reminded me to take my medicine, who kept me company when night fell and fear came over me. I told myself that a person capable of such care would never be capable of such betrayal. But the truth has a habit of showing itself even when we pretend not to see it. It appears in the details, in the way he avoided meeting my eyes when she was nearby, in the silence that filled the room when I walked in and found the two of them talking. I felt my chest tighten, but I did not have the courage to ask anything. It was easier to pretend everything was still in place, and so I lived for a long time, suspended between gratitude and suspicion. I wanted to believe it was all invention of my tired mind. But deep down, I already knew the day would come when I could no longer pretend, that there would be a moment when the truth would bear itself before me, leaving me no way to deny it. And it was that fear that began to steal my sleep. I would lie down, close my eyes, and see scenes that cut into me like a knife. I saw the two of them together, laughing at me behind my back. I saw my husband telling me he loved me and then running to her arms. I would cry quietly, not knowing whether it was delirium or a warning. Today, looking back, I see my intuition always knew. Only my heart took longer to accept it. I remember as if it were today the morning she arrived. It was early, the dew still dripping from the leaves in the yard, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. I was sitting at the table, rolling the buttered bread between my fingers, thinking about how long the days had become. My body no longer had the same vigor, and loneliness weighed heavier than any ache in my legs. That was when someone clapped their hands at the front gate. My husband was home at that hour. He got up, looked out the window, and said in an indifferent tone that it was the young woman who had come about the work. I straightened the kerchief on my head, took a deep breath, and asked him to bring her into the kitchen. I was not expecting anything beyond one more person willing to help with the chores. I could never have imagined that this would be the morning that changed everything. She came in slowly, making no noise. She carried a cloth bag slung over her shoulder, and her dress was so plain it seemed to have been worn by many other women before her. When she raised her eyes to greet me, I saw an old weariness in that girl. Because though she was young in face, her manner was that of someone who had already seen much sorrow. She lowered her head, said good morning in a soft voice, and stood waiting for me to say something. I asked where she came from, if she had any family, if she had worked in other houses. She answered everything without hurry, always looking at the floor. She told me she had come from far away, that she no longer had a mother or father, that she had worked for an elderly lady for a long time, and that she was used to caring for a house and for people who were unwell. I felt my heart loosen in pity. Perhaps that was all I saw in her at first. A girl in need of an opportunity. I invited her to sit. I offered her coffee. She refused, as if she did not want to impose. But I insisted, and when I set the cup before her, she lifted her face and thanked me with a smile, so restrained it seemed more sadness than joy. I found myself thinking it would be good to have company. The house was so large, so empty. My husband spent the day away, and I stayed there, surrounded by the echo of my own thoughts. That morning, we spoke little. I explained what I needed: help with cleaning, with cooking, and maybe, from time to time, company when my health failed me. She said she would do everything with care, that she did not need much, only a place to sleep and food on the table. I felt that there was someone willing to be dedicated. I could not know that there was also another willingness hidden behind that calm face. When she left, my husband kept watching me. He asked if I had liked her. I said yes, that she seemed like a decent young woman, that she seemed trustworthy. He shrugged, as if he did not care. But today, remembering that look, I see that perhaps he knew more than I could imagine. Several days passed before she came back. In that time, I thought much about whether I was doing the right thing. I had always been someone who kept my reservations. I never liked too many strangers hovering around my life. But loneliness makes us accept the company even of those we do not know. When she knocked again at the gate, I felt a pang of relief. It was as if, at last, someone would fill that long emptiness. She brought few clothes, wrapped in a cloth. She said she did not have many belongings, that life had never given her any luxury. I led her to the little room in the back, where there was a simple bed and an old chest of drawers. She passed her hand over the sheet, as if she was not used to even having a place of her own to sleep. I felt a strange tenderness. I thought that God had sent me that girl, so that one could care for the other. I did not know that life also brings lessons disguised as help. In the first week, she worked with dedication. The house took on a new air. The floor gleamed clean. The clothes turned whiter than ever. When I grew tired, she would bring me water, ask if I needed anything. I began to think that God had done me a favor by putting that creature in my path. And for some time, that was what I chose to believe. It was weeks, maybe months, during which I believed that God had placed that young woman in my path to fill a void no one else seemed to notice. Since my children had each gone their own way and my husband spent more time away from home than inside it, I carried a loneliness that ached down to my bones. When she arrived, with that manner of speaking little and doing much, I thought that at last I would have someone to share the long hours of the afternoons. I would wake early and already hear her steps in the kitchen. She swept the floor, set water to boil, began to prepare the bread, and I would sit at the edge of the bed, listening to those simple sounds that somehow brought me peace. Sometimes I would get up and go to meet her in the kitchen. She would offer me coffee and ask if I had slept well. I would say yes, though it was almost always a lie, because sorrow has a habit of coming at night and only leaving when daylight breaks. She seemed to sense, even without asking much, that my heart was not whole, and it was in her quietness that I felt some relief. I had lived surrounded by people who always wanted to know too much of my life. Curious neighbors, relatives who judged without knowing. Not her. She listened without judging, helped without complaint. And that made me believe there was a goodness in her I could not find anywhere else. I began to tell her things I did not say to anyone. I spoke of the fear of being alone, of the weariness that bent my legs, of the longing for children who only came when they had time left over. She listened to it all in silence. Sometimes she would raise her eyes and nod slowly, as if she understood, and I felt less alone. There was an afternoon when the pain in my hip pinned me to the bed. I tried to get up, but my legs would not obey. It was she who helped me sit up, who brought me water, who prepared the medicine. She sat by my side until the pain eased. That day, I held her hand and thanked her, as one thanks a daughter. And for a moment, I even thought that was what she was to me, a daughter lent by life. When my husband came home, he would find everything in order, the meal prepared, the house clean, me more rested. He began to praise her ways, said that finally we had someone we could trust. I was glad to hear that, because I thought that, at least in this, we agreed. I did not see then that there were other feelings growing in the spaces my innocence could not reach. For a long time, I thought I had gained a friend, someone who not only cleaned my house but helped keep my soul from growing too heavy. I did not know that while I saw her as a support, she already had another role in the story I did not yet know. And that part of the truth in those days I was not ready to see. In those days, my body no longer obeyed as it once did. Age has that way about it. It arrives without asking permission, and slowly takes away the strength that once seemed endless. It was during that time that I began to depend on her in a way I never imagined I would depend on anyone. Sometimes I woke up unable to rise by myself. The aches would come and spread through my chest, my back, my legs, and it was she who appeared with her serene face and hands ready to help me. I remember a night when I woke up feeling I could not breathe. My heart was racing, and my head seemed to spin. I called for my husband, but he did not hear me. She was the one who came first. She took my hand and asked me to breathe slowly. She brought a damp cloth and laid it on my forehead. She sat there by my bed until I grew calm again. When my eyes closed once more, I thought to myself that God had sent me an angel to support me in that hour of weakness. For many months, that was how it was. I needed her more than I would have had the courage to admit. When my hands trembled, she was the one who wrote the notes I sent to my children. When I could not read the letters that arrived, she was the one who sat at the edge of the bed and read every word to me with patience. When the loneliness came in the middle of the night, it was her voice that reminded me I was not as alone as I felt. I counted on that good presence. And the more I trusted, the more it seemed to me that she had come into this world just to care for me. When my neighbors asked how I was, I would say that, despite everything, I was blessed to have found someone so helpful. I spoke of her with affection, almost as if I were speaking of someone in the family. I never imagined that those same hands that held me steady were the same hands that held my husband's arm when he thought no one saw. It was during that time that my husband began spending more time at home. He said that work had slowed, that orders had lessened. I believed him, because when you love, you do not suspect easily, and because I was more afraid of losing my peace than of being deceived. When he came in, sat at the table and spoke to me, I noticed that, now and again, his eyes would stray discreetly to where she was, but I did not want to give a name to what I saw. Because when you give something a name, you give it form, and I was not ready to face that form. There was an afternoon when she came to help me bathe. I felt ashamed because I never liked depending on anyone. But she was so gentle that for an instant, I thought I owed her everything that was left of a dignified life. I did not know that at the very same time, I was giving her the trust she did not deserve. They were days and nights when I needed her more than I wanted to admit. And perhaps that is why, when the truth finally came, it hurt so much. Because it was not only my husband who was betraying me, it was also the one who, so many times, had wiped away my tears. If I close my eyes now, I can still remember the day I realized my husband was no longer the same man who walked into the church by my side, promising fidelity. It did not happen all at once. It was like a flame that goes out little by little, until all that remains is a cold ember, without light and without warmth. I did not want to see it, because it was easier to pretend that nothing had changed. He came home with heavy steps, as if carrying his own conscience was tiring. He sat at the table and ate without looking me in the eyes. I would ask if everything was all right, and he would say yes, in a voice that did not convince even himself. Sometimes he would get up from his chair before finishing his plate, as if something was calling him outside. I stayed sitting there, staring at the empty place, thinking about how many silences could fit between two people who had shared so much. There was one afternoon when he came home earlier than usual. I was in the living room folding clothes when I heard the gate open. I thought he had come to keep me company, that perhaps he missed our talks. But when I looked through the window, I saw he stopped in the yard near her. They turned their backs to me and spoke in low voices. I could not hear what they were saying, but it was enough to see how she lowered her head and how he leaned his body toward her, to feel a chill run through me, a warning that this was not only friendship. That day, something inside me broke. It was as if my heart understood before my mind would accept it. I wanted to run out to them, ask what was happening, demand the truth, but my legs would not obey. I stayed frozen there, looking through the glass, with a knot in my throat that did not loosen even when night fell. After that, he spent more time at home, but it was as if he were not there at all. He slept in the same bed, but he no longer shared dreams with me. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and feel his body distant, even though he was lying only inches away. He would turn to the side and sigh like someone carrying a weight he did not want to share. And I would lie there in the darkness, thinking of everything we had built and how much was falling apart without a sound. I began to notice the small things. His eyes, which avoided mine, the exaggerated care he took when he spoke about her, the haste to defend her when someone hinted at anything. I told myself it was an exaggeration of my imagination, that it was loneliness playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew. I had always known. Perhaps that was what hurt the most, realizing that out of fear, I had chosen to deceive myself. Because a woman can endure many things, but the awareness of having been blind by her own choice is a wound that takes a long time to heal. The signs were everywhere. They were not shouts nor obvious proof, but little hints that gathered until they became a weight I could no longer pretend not to feel. Still, my heart insisted on denying it, because the truth hurts more when it dismantles everything you believed for an entire lifetime. I began to notice that when she came near him, his eyes shone in a way they no longer did when they looked at me. It was a quick glimmer, almost imperceptible, but it burned deep in my soul. He always took special care not to show anything in front of others, but sometimes the body betrays what the mouth wants to hide. The way he straightened in his chair when she walked by, the embarrassed silence when I entered the room, the tone of voice that grew softer when he spoke to her. All of it was a message, even if no one spoke a word. There was an afternoon when I needed help to climb up to the bedroom. I called for her, but she did not answer. So, with effort, I went down the hall, and there I found the two of them, speaking in low voices. I did not hear any confession. I did not see any gesture that could be pointed at as sin, but I saw the way she laid her hand on his arm, like someone who no longer fears being close. That was when I felt my throat go dry. I went back to my corner without saying anything, carrying the shame of one who knows but does not want to know. I told myself it might be all in my head. I repeated that she was only a devoted servant, that my husband was only a tired man looking for some relief in conversation. But my heart no longer believed those excuses, and even so, I did not want to admit it, because admitting it meant confessing I had lost everything that held up my peace. The nights grew longer after that. I would wake to the noise of my own thoughts. I kept remembering every detail. The day he praised her cooking with such enthusiasm, as if he had never praised mine. The day he defended her in front of a neighbor, with a haste that did not match the importance of the matter. The way he took too long in the yard when she was there. Each memory was a new wound, but I pretended it was only silly worry, because I could not bear the thought that the woman to whom I entrusted my sorrows was also the cause of them. I thought many times of asking, of coming to him and demanding the truth, but I always lacked the strength, because I knew that once the truth leaves the mouth, there is no way to take it back, and I was not ready to lose for good what little was left of our life together. So for a long time I did what so many women do. I closed my eyes, I bowed my head, I pretended I did not see, but a person's soul always knows, and mine was already weeping before I ever had the courage to cry aloud. I always imagined that if I ever discovered a betrayal, it would be through a forgotten note, a letter fallen behind a piece of furniture, a whisper that slipped out in a careless moment. But that was not how it happened. The truth came in a way I could never have expected, like a door that suddenly opens and shows you the scene you most fear. It was late afternoon. I was sitting on the porch, trying to distract my mind with my sewing. My fingers no longer had the steadiness they once did, and the thread kept slipping from the needle. I took deep breaths, telling myself it was just another day like any other, until I heard her voice coming from the yard. She did not know I was so near, nor that I could hear every word, and that was how everything came to light. She was speaking to my husband. Her voice was low but firm. I remember every syllable, because it is carved into my memory like a scar. She said she could no longer bear living that way, that she was tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be just the maid when, in truth, she was much more. I could not breathe. I sat there frozen, my heart beating so hard it felt it might explode in my chest. My husband tried to calm her. He said something I did not catch clearly, but his tone was not one of remorse. It was the voice of someone who promises the impossible to keep the comfort of a lie. I felt the tears rise, but I did not let a single one fall, because in that moment I understood that if I cried, I would be giving them the power to see me broken, and that I would not allow. When she realized I was there, she turned her face toward me. For a second, our eyes met. I do not know how to describe what I saw. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was fear, but there was no courage in that gaze. My husband saw me too. He turned pale as someone who sees a ghost, and in a way, I was a ghost, the ghost of everything they had destroyed. I rose slowly. My legs trembled, but I would not fall before them. I passed by without saying a word. I went into the house and closed the door carefully, as if I did not want the world to hear the sound of my dignity being gathered up from the floor. That night, I did not sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark window, asking God where I had gone wrong. I tried to find in my heart some feeling that was not sadness, but I could not. It was not anger that I felt. It was mourning. Mourning for the man I thought I had, for the friendship I believed was true, for the entire life that now seemed a lie. It was that day I discovered there are pains we cannot share with anyone, because no one understands the wound that bleeds inside you when you lose everything all at once. When a woman discovers she has been betrayed, the pain is deep like a well that seems to have no bottom. But when that betrayal comes from two people she trusted, the hole grows even darker. That night, I did not cry, only because I had lost my husband. I cried because I had also lost the person in whom I had placed my last trust. She had been for me a relief, a companion, almost a comfort for the silence of the house. How many times did I thank God for sending me someone so helpful? How many times did I think I was fortunate to have by my side a creature who cared for me with such dedication? And yet, that very care was the same that nourished the lie that was unfolding under my own roof. I kept remembering the days when I needed her, the way she lifted me when my legs would not obey, the way she wiped my face when the fever came, the patience with which she listened to me talk about my life, my fears, my dreams, and each memory was like a blade turning slowly inside my chest. There was a morning when I saw her sweeping the yard, as if nothing had happened, her kerchief tied around her head, her eyes on the ground. I thought about walking out that door and asking how she had the courage, asking whether she ever felt shame to embrace me with one hand and with the other hold the lie that was killing me little by little. But I did not go, because I knew that any answer she could give me would not change what I felt. I also looked at him and wondered whether he ever thought about the pain he was causing me, whether, when he came back to the bedroom and lay by my side, he felt at least a breath of remorse. But the remorse never came. He acted as if nothing had been discovered, as if pretending the truth had not been spoken would make it vanish. I saw that pretending, and I felt more sadness than anger. It was during that time that I understood betrayal does not only destroy love, it destroys the trust that holds everything together. When a woman loses faith in the word of the one who sleeps beside her, she also loses a part of herself. And I felt that, in that house, I was no longer whole. I asked myself how to begin again, how to gather the pieces of a story that had turned to shards, and for many days I found no answer. I only knew that what hurt most was not being deceived by him. It was being deceived by her too, because from him I could expect any weakness, but from her I expected truth. After everything came to light, many people expected I would create a scandal, that I would throw him out of the house, that I would shout at her in front of everyone, that I would tell the neighbors every detail of the betrayal. I know there were those who wanted to watch my pain, as if they were watching a soap opera, but I did not give them that spectacle. I chose silence. It was not out of cowardice. It was because I knew that nothing I said would make my heart hurt any less. No public humiliation would bring back what I had lost, and I did not want my dignity to be buried along with theirs. I was already wounded enough to allow anger to turn me into a woman I would not recognize. In those days, I still rose early as always. I made my coffee, arranged my hair, put on my clean dress, and I pretended at a normalcy that no longer existed. Inside, I was in ruins, but on the outside, I kept the composure my mother taught me, because she always said that you only truly lose when you forget who you are. I no longer spoke to her except when necessary. I answered when I had to, in a low voice and without meeting her eyes. She also avoided looking at me. I could see she carried guilt, but I never heard an apology. And if it came, perhaps I would not have wanted to hear it, because sometimes silence preserves a last shred of dignity that words cannot save. With him, life became a desert. He pretended nothing had happened. He sat at the table, spoke of the weather, of the harvest, of any banal thing. I answered in the same way, in short phrases, only so I would not have to hear the echo of the entire house. It was a pretense that hurt, but that seemed less shameful to me than laying our disgrace bare before everyone. I know that in the neighborhood there were rumors. They said I was a woman without courage, that I lacked the spirit to put the two of them in their place. But no one knew what it was to carry that pain inside your chest. No one knew the cost of holding a shattered story and still finding the strength to keep breathing. It was in that silence that I began gathering my strength. I understood that time was my time of mourning. Mourning for everything I had lost, for everything I had discovered, and also for everything that would never be the same again. And deep down, I knew the silence I chose to keep was my way of not losing myself as well. I knew that sooner or later that moment would come. You cannot share the same roof with someone who broke your trust without, at some point, having to speak the truth, even if only in a few words. I spent many nights imagining how that meeting would be. I thought I would tremble, that my voice would falter. But when it came, it was different. I was so tired of pretending that there was no space left for fear. It was morning. I was sitting by the stove, stirring the coffee, when she walked into the kitchen with her head lowered. I raised my face, and for the first time since everything came to light, looked straight into her eyes. She tried to look away, but I did not allow it. I wanted her to see that I was no longer the deceived woman she believed me to be. The silence lasted a few moments, heavy as stone. Then I spoke. My voice came out firm, without shouting, without tears. I said I knew everything. That I did not need a confession, because the truth was already before us, and that, even so, I wished her no harm, because the worst punishment was not my contempt. It was that she would have to live with her own conscience. She began to stammer something that sounded like an apology, but I raised my hand, asking her not to say anything. I did not want to hear justifications, because no justification washes away the sin of betraying trust. I said the greatest pain was not having been betrayed by a man, but by someone I had seen almost as a daughter, and that this wound could not be closed with any word. She cried. She lowered her head even more and let fall the tears that, I imagine, she had been carrying for a long time. I did not cry, because that day I understood that my weeping was spent. All that remained in me was a quiet sorrow, the certainty that I had been whole while she chose to be only half. When I finished speaking, I turned my back and left the kitchen. I went to my bedroom and closed the door carefully, not out of fear, but because I knew that from then on, nothing obliged me to look at her the same way again, and in a way I felt relief. It was as if I had returned the weight she had placed on my shoulders, and in returning it, I had found again the part of me that silence had nearly stolen. When you go through a pain that big, you imagine you will never again have the strength to rise. I myself thought that the day I discovered everything would also be the day my soul broke in a way that could never be mended. But time is a teacher that shows us what we do not want to learn. It was in the quiet of the days that followed that I realized that no matter how much it hurts, life goes on. I woke many mornings, not knowing if I even wanted to go on. I looked around the house that once seemed so full of meaning and saw only walls that kept lies. The breakfast table where he sat and pretended nothing was wrong. The chair where she sat, so helpful. Everything seemed marked with a stamp of falsehood that shamed me. And yet, I still got up. I put the water to boil, washed my face, arranged my kerchief, because some part of me still wanted to prove I would not be destroyed. Little by little, I began to discover that the woman I was had not died there, that inside me there was still a remnant of dignity no one could steal. I began walking in the yard again, smelling the flowers I myself had planted. I began opening the windows and letting the sun in, like someone inviting hope to return. And little by little, I felt there was still something of mine in that place. The neighbors came asking why I did not send him away, why I did not throw her out of the house. I answered that it was not out of weakness. It was because I needed time. Time to understand what I wanted to do with my life. Time to be sure my decisions would not be made in the heat of anger. And that time was my medicine. It was in the loneliness that I began gathering the pieces of myself that had been scattered on the floor. There was a day I looked in the mirror and realized my eyes were no longer only sad. There was a new brightness there. It was not happiness. It was something else. It was the serenity of someone who has suffered and still has not lost respect for herself. I understood that was my victory. Not shouting, not throwing them out, not making a scandal. It was remaining whole despite everything. I do not say that I forgave. Some things do not deserve forgiveness. But I learned that holding hatred corrodes us first. So I decided I would not carry vengeance in my heart. I would go on, not for them, but for me, because I deserved peace. And it was that certainty that made me be reborn. Today, after so much time, when I look back, I see that woman I once was with a mixture of tenderness and respect. I remember the pain, the silence, the loneliness that seemed endless. But I also remember the strength that was born in me during the time when everything collapsed. Life went on, not as I had dreamed, but as it was possible. I did not become bitter, though many people thought that would be my fate. I did not spend my days planning revenge or wishing that their suffering would be greater than mine, because I understood that bitterness is a poison you drink, hoping the other will die, and I did not want to die inside. My husband kept living with me for a while. It was like sharing a roof with a stranger. He tried to act as before, but everything was already different. Love had turned into something else. It was not hate, but it was no longer affection either. It was only a habit dragging itself through the days, like an old garment you have no courage to throw away. I looked at him and felt pity, because deep down, he too was lost in the lie he had built. She left on a rainy afternoon. There was no farewell. She simply left her few things in a corner and went away without looking back. I stood at the window, watching that figure walk away. I did not wish her any harm. I only thought that each one carries the burden of what they choose to do. And I did not need to carry the weight that belonged to her. Time helped to erase some of the pain. It did not erase everything, because certain wounds leave marks forever, but it made everything more bearable. I came to take pleasure again in the smell of coffee, in the song of the birds, in the way the afternoon slowly fell over the yard, and that was enough for me to understand that I had won. Won not because I had done justice in the eyes of the world, but because I did not let bitterness take over who I was. I was betrayed, deceived, humiliated in silence, but I never became like them. And that is why, today, when people ask me how I managed to endure, I say that peace is the greatest answer a woman can give, because the peace of one who does not carry bitterness is what remains when everything else is lost, and no one can steal that from us. Are you curious to find out how it all happened? Then subscribe to the channel now and leave a comment telling me where you're listening to this story from. I love to know where you're following me from. And look, if I were you, I wouldn't miss what's coming up. The truth I'm about to reveal will move you in ways you can't even imagine. Are you ready?